Been a while since I did this. Let's see if I can do it. So I ain't never really gone back and watched the entire, and I don't even know. I think there's a couple of them, but I finally watched like a full hour-long lecture by Pageau on the Fool. I'd heard him discuss it here and there, like mentioning it, but I never really, I guess, delved in to hear like his whole exposition. And it ties into other things I've heard him talk about before: fringes, edges of the field, but gosh, I think it's such an attempt at trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, and because right there is the tradition of the Fool in Western thought, but it doesn't really quite work in the biblical story, and yes, Purim kind of opens up a path for this. I think that is the best kind of foot in the door, but when then trying to apply it to other places, I think it just kind of it doesn't work. It falls apart in a lot of ways. Some of the ways are just like basic and obvious. Some of the ways are like big differences between Judaism and Christianity, or what he calls traditional Christianity, I guess. Probably more, I would say, Orthodox Christianity. So like one. He's a much more anarchic, stronger kind of dualism view of the world, and it's a very kind of Petersonian, right, where you have like order, chaos, and then you have like the fringe that has to allow in some chaos. But that's really not the view of kind of non-anarchic monotheistic Judaism. Now, I'm going to leave Kabbalah aside for a little bit for now, and that's a whole discussion that maybe we can kind of bring a little more coherence between the two sides, but just starting from the basic premise that so he sees, right, the chaos is these forces of evil that are at the edge, and they threaten order, and God is basically a God of order, and then this non-being chaos at the edge, is a threat. But that, of course, is not the view of Genesis, right? Genesis is exactly trying to fight the Babylonian, concept of Tiamat. It is a rejection of, very explicitly, of that there's a battle in the cosmic order, that there are other powers out there. God is the creator of all of it, the chaos and the order. And that's, I don't think, made any more explicit than in the book of Job, but also everywhere else, right? And the brothers selling Joseph off, in Cyrus and Nebuchadnezzar and the Assyrians, and that God is in charge of the history and the good and the bad and the messy, and that there's a plan to it all underneath it. Humans often can't discern. It's all there, and like God wants Leviathan in His creation. Right? The goal is not to destroy Leviathan, or that Leviathan serves a purpose, as long as creation is still kind of, let's say, at play. Maybe eschatologically, right? So we do have a whole idea that's a whole other conversation that I've never actually finished recording. But maybe someday I will, on Leviathan in this thought. But at least until the eschaton, at least, like God is in the chaos and God is behind it, and it's not really chaos; it's just hidden order. And God is the creator, equally the creator of it and the other. There is no, like, Satan is not a rebellious angel, right? Like, Satan is the prosecutor that God creates, like in the Bible, and it's God who points out Job to Satan. It's not Satan who instigates. And like, it's just there's so many things. So I can just do like little points for now. This is the Saskatoon lecture. So he talks about Purim, and then he goes through this whole thing, and he talks about, you have this trope where you have all these days where you have like topsy-turviness, and then like right after we have this like moment of sobriety and death and considering like our fates and like whatever. But of course, that's true across the Christian holidays that he cited, but it's not true for Purim, where Purim is not followed by death and fasting and sobriety, but it's the other way around, right? The day before Purim is a fast day, and Purim happens as a celebration after people are killed. and it is not about our death. We don't think about our death, but we do. I mean, we do think about, like, we could have died and we didn't, because God's hand is behind, is in history and shaping these events. So there is this one interesting, and I think it's actually important, because in the examples he gave when he did the Feast of Fools and the Feast of the Ass and Mardi Gras, in all these examples, you have an upside down world, but the assumption is that the hierarchy, in the first place, is like a good thing. The order is good, but it can't be like all encompassing. It needs to just be like disrupted a little bit, which is the kind of, and then it's for one day and then it passes and we're done. Whereas it's almost the opposite in the Jewish perspective, in part because the Jews are the people at the fringe, right? It's in the Feast of Fools, let's say in the movie Hunchback of Notre Dame, like Quasimodo is the king and then he gets humiliated at the end. That is not the Esther story, right? The Esther story is the people who are being humiliated are the people who end up being the king, right? It's the other way around. The very idea, and this goes to the end of his lecture, he talks about kind of the Sabbath being at the fringe and like not, you want to give up some space to chaos. Well, the Sabbath is not chaos. It's the opposite of chaos. He also talks about Sabbath as death, but this is a very different idea from us who see Sabbath as a taste of, it is death in the sense of it's the taste of the afterlife, but it's not this like, it's not chaos. It's where the holiness is. Like the holiness is in the Sabbath. The whole week exists for the sake of the Sabbath. We would like a time, like we don't necessarily want a time where every day is Purim, but at the same time, like there's this concept that Purim is the only holiday that will exist after Messiah comes. It is kind of like the necessary and ideal in a sense, and like we would love, like, we pray for a time, like every Sabbath we pray for a time when every day is the Sabbath. And that is not the worldview of someone saying the Sabbath is chaos, and we need to like leave a little bit of place at the fringe. In fact, it's the opposite. We see this also at the field. Yes, we leave the fringes we leave the edges, the corners of our field in the mitzvah of Peah. But on the sabbatical year or the Jubilee year, the entire field it has to be left, and that's considered like the ideal, right? So that is the Garden of Eden state, and we recognize that we can't be in that Edenic state or that eschatological state or the messianic state until that time comes when Messiah comes. But it seems it's like the same idea but flipped on its head. Which is right. That's what the fool does. So Christianity is almost flipping the idea of Judaism, where that flip is the ideal, by flipping, or the flip of the flip is the ideal, by flipping it yet again. And like that, it's exactly that. This runs through. It's a pattern that goes through all of these stories in the way that he presents them versus the way I understand them, where we flip our symbologies. The other thing I thought was interesting is that humor does not appear in any of the full stories that he gave from the Bible, right? Humor is not used in the David stories, whether it's with the ark coming into Jerusalem and the dancing, or the taking of the robe from Saul, or even the Esther story. Yes, like we do celebrate Purim with humor now, but like one that's actually a fairly recent innovation in a sense. It's only the past 700 years or so, but even before that, there's this like, it's become more and more of a fool holiday in some ways, but like that's certainly not the way. It's just from the biblical text, forgetting how it's celebrated or ritualized by the rabbis later, for a second. Like that is not what's going on, and I think it's like a misreading, because it's not really a fool. As I had one discussion with Matt C a little bit on, right? Like in many ways, the prophets are these outsiders who sometimes are called to do what would seem to be kind of ridiculous acts, marrying a prostitute, getting undressed, or at least partially disrobed for 3 years, to make a point, right? They demonstrate points through embodied actions in the world, but it's never it's not only not, it's one, it's always accusatory. Two, it doesn't always flip the flip. And three, it's never for humor. It's never for humor. There is lots of humor in the Bible. There's lots of puns and wordplay. Stuff like that happens at like the narrative level. But actual laughter in the Bible
in a quarter mile, keep left to stay on Clara Barton Parkway.
I mean, we have a whole understanding of laughter, both kind of from the Hasidic Kabbalistic traditions, but even before that, or before that maybe, okay, that's not the right way to phrase it, but like separate from that, we have the whole thing of Yitzchak, and Yitzchak being Isaac, the laughter that leads to Isaac.
Keep left to stay on Clara Barton Parkway.
And there is a flip there, but I wouldn't say there's anyone playing a fool, even though there is like this comedic laughter element of like, the people who made fun
Continue on Clara Barton Parkway for 3/4 of a mile.
Sorry. Gosh, I wish I had turned that off. The people who made fun of Sarah, now, she responds to them with laughter because she does in fact have a son after they laughed that she couldn't have a son. So you have that there kind of, but it's not, no one's trying to get like cheap laughs here. I mean, that's not what it is. And I just think
in a quarter mile, take the exit toward I-495 North.
As I said, it's a square peg in a round hole. It kind of looks like it could fit maybe if you kind of jam it in there, but like it doesn't fit neatly or nicely. Like, I don't think it's quite as universal, but it's certainly within Christianity and within West.
Take the exit toward I-495 North.
There is sort of a more universal, not universal, but like it's a Western trope. We have the medieval.
Continue for 1.5 miles.
There's no role of a fool in a Jewish court, right? The fools were not part of the Semitic ancient Near Eastern like monarchies. That was not a thing. The fact that there was a prophet who could give critique and push back at the king and was outside of the power structure, in some ways precedes the trope of the fool existing later. But that was unique. I mean, Israel was kind of unique in having that as far as we can tell. Usually, prophets were kind of part of the temple, priestly, whatever system. The fact that Jewish prophets weren't always priests, and even when they were priests, they were usually kind of outcasty priests, is itself kind of a very interesting thing. Of course, ironically, one of the few prophets that is really part of the royal family and very like integrated into it is Natan, right? Natan is David's half-brother. Solomon's half-brother, right? Natan is David's son, and he is the prophet. But that's one of the...
In a quarter mile, keep left at the fork. Follow signs for I-495 North.
Isaiah is another potential exception because, at least according to the rabbinic tradition, he is a member of the royal family. But either way, it is
keep left at the fork.
And also the fool, right? So the fool in a traditional kind of Western setting just could criticize the king, but in the Jewish kind of or Israelite whatever monarchy setting, like the prophet was there to criticize everyone. He was there to criticize the people. So that's much more like a modern comedian / fool, right? Criticize the priests, criticize the people, criticize the king. Like everyone's kind of a fair target because everyone is responsible for upholding the law, not just the king. So that's a whole other conversation. But anyway, I think I made my main point. My main point was I don't think his thing quite works with the whole chaos order thing, because in a non-Enochic monotheist perspective, God is behind the chaos, and it's not really chaos, and like the ideal is that holy state that is, cannot be all the time. The whole world is not the temple. The whole world is, all the time is not the Sabbath. We are all not priests yet, right? But like the goal is, and our fields have to be worked, and we can't just like give all our food to everyone and not keep any for ourselves. And yet, like in the kind of the Jubilaic ideal and the Messianic eschatological ideal, we would return to a semi-Edenic state, right? So I think that's one thing. The other thing there was a couple other things I wanted to push back on. That's my main point. he's adding a lot into the whole David Saul cutting the robe thing. Like, one does not say it's his it's Saul's hem. It's not exposing any nakedness, especially if you know anything about Israelite Israelite clothing and fashion in this era, from what we do know from depictions mostly by their enemies, but also from archaeology and things like that. Like, they wear lots of layers, and there's no way that he had any part of him exposed. The text doesn't mention nakedness in that context. The symbology of cutting the fringe of the robe and the hem is a very long thing, but it really is much more about, because right, it's a symbol that comes from Samuel initially, because Samuel's mother made him a new robe every year. It sounds like on his birthday, would send it up to him at the temple, and this robe becomes his symbol as a prophet. And then there's this moment when Saul, grabs Samuel's robe, and then it rips. And Samuel says, just like this ripped, your kingdom will be ripped from you. It's also, Saul recognizes Samuel by his robe when he summons his spirit with the witch of Endor. My favorite biblical Star Wars reference. And
in 1,000 feet, keep left at the fork to continue on I-270 spur north. Follow signs for I-270.
And then and then that gets passed down, right? So it becomes the robe as symbol of authority, which does not
keep left at the fork to continue on I-270 spur north.
A traditional symbol of authority becomes one, because then it happens with David and Saul when David
continue for 3 miles.
So it then echoes down into history, and then you'll see it again with Elisha and Elijah when he asks to take up his mantle. So it kind of echoes through kind of this period of prophets and kings through these kind of lines. But I don't it's not that right. It's funny because it's the fringe that is the kingdom. Not the cloak and whatever. There's a whole thing about authority here, and we can go into the symbolism. It's fascinating, and if we really dig into the verses, there's even more we can get out of it. It could also connect to a couple other places where this stuff comes up, and especially Genesis. But that kind of aside, I think he's adding all these funky layers here. And the idea that their clothes represent death, I don't know how I feel. It's weird, because here actually, right, so the midrash is that the clothes, this is different than the church fathers, or at least the ones that Pageau often quotes on here. But the rabbis say that the clothes of skin, well, there's two interpretations. One is that they're basically cloaks made out of nails, which has
in 2 miles, use the right lane to take exit 4 for I-270 Montrose Road.
But the one that I've studied a lot more, and that I think's more directly relevant to what I can talk to, at least, is that they're wearing the Leviathan's skin. Now, because how is that possible? Well, there are 2 Leviathans. God created everything in pairs from the beginning. It says by their species, and that's also used at the Ark. So the rabbis learned, okay, there used to be 2 Leviathans, and that's actually explicit in Isaiah, that there are 2 Leviathans. But God kills one at the beginning of creation so that they wouldn't have kids that would destroy the world. And then the other one is kind of left in the world and will be killed by God at the time, at the end of days. Okay, long, complex thing, but that's kind of where it's at. So the one that was killed was the male. Actually, was it? I might be flipping it. It was one of them. Is the one that maybe it was the female. I don't remember now. It is important for symbolism stuff, but I don't remember it in the card. So God clothes them, right? So they're being clothed kind of, and it's a protective garment of chaos, which is as fascinating, and it's a way for the rabbis. I've made this argument before. I don't know if anyone's ever heard it, but I think I've definitely made it here before, not on YouTube, but in this little corner, that they're being clothed in chaos in a way protects them, because it protects them in some ways from their own knowledge of good and evil, but it's really fascinating. and it's a way for the rabbis
In a quarter mile,
to,
use the right
I would
lane
say,
to take exit 4 for I-270 Montrose Road.
domesticate. It's a way for them to domesticate the Babylonian, Akkadian myths about Tiamat in a very different way. So Tiamat, obviously Leviathan is not Tiamat because like God makes Leviathan on purpose.
Use the right lane to take exit 4, then keep right to continue on exit 4A.
But just like the Midrash, where God has to prevent the waters from overtaking the land and give them a limit, so in some ways God also gives chaos a limit. But God's always in control of it, right? It's not a battle of chaos versus order. And God wants the chaos and wants the order, but they both have boundaries.
Keep right to continue on exit 4A.
But in humans that cross the boundary to try to get knowledge but beyond themselves, to see the order and the chaos,
keep left at the fork.
that is inappropriate for them to kind of discern. God like rewraps them in chaos, in a thin layer. Sorry, so it's
in a quarter mile, use the left 2 lanes to turn left onto Tower Oaks Boulevard.
Is there any other things that I was like really struck by that was like, this is a little off or weird, or I don't quite see this reading? There probably were.
Use the left 2 lanes to turn left onto Tower Oaks Boulevard.
Those are the ones that really got under my skin a little bit. I just don't quite see this trope working in this way, at least from like a Jewish symbol perspective. But I am sure I'm going to end this video and put it up. And now that people are back from Chino, I know Chezi's a big fan of this Pageauian kind of view of the world, and I know Jacob will probably give me like an earful of Kabbalistic stuff around Sitra Achra and how it functions, and that's not
continue on Tower Oaks Boulevard for half a mile.
Intelligently. But yeah, otherwise, I don't know. I mean, I'm really curious to know about the whole fringe tzitzit thing that happened at Chino. Like, I feel like I'm not quite in enough on the conversation to like, I'm just watching this now in an attempt to like kind of maybe just, I'm still 3 years behind in a sense, right? Like maybe this will help a little bit. The ritual of the fringes is very important of the tzitzit, and I don't know what you guys talked about. I wrote a whole article about this. I mean, I love the mitzvah of tzitzit.
In a quarter mile, turn right onto Wooden Parkway.
To me, it has a lot of significance, but part of the significance is to make sure that one not just like maintains a fringe, but like attends to it. Like it is where
turn right onto Wooden Parkway.
You need to be watching, and kind of also like stuff. I don't know. I've also been reading stuff from Wolfram lately on entropy and information theory, and it is exactly there where like
continue for 4 miles.
Peterson's approach here. It's not like I don't get where it's coming from and the Jungian stuff, and I get where that is. I just don't necessarily think, one, I don't think it's universal, and two, I'm not even sure that it fits in like a Jewish biblical reading. But I definitely can see where the connections might matter. I did like one point I want to end with, that Wolfram has this point that like it's not really chaos and order. And maybe Peterson makes this point too somewhere. I haven't watched enough of him to honestly. Hopefully he's picked this up, right? It's only chaos until you can see the order behind it, and that's kind of what the promise of the Leviathan being kind of killed in the eschaton and fed to the righteous is about, in the Midrash, and sitting in the sukkah of Leviathan. It's about being able to perceive the order and the chaos and seeing God's hand was there the whole time, and it's all part of God's plan. And there wasn't any dualism that one perceived was illusion, which I think we can all kind of agree on. I don't think there's a big difference there. But yeah. Oh yeah, the other thing was David. Oh, whatever. I'm not gonna get into it. Enough. I hope you all are having a great time. You all enjoyed your various vacations, trips. I know everyone's doing things right now. I am not, but yeah, I hope it's been good, guys.